2061, something like that. I don't think I reached, my birthday in 2061, so I think I die when I'm 99.
Wow.
Which is kind of interesting as a penultimate number right before 100, as somebody involved in time travel research as a kid and later. But so I think that explains it, is that they were able to track a specific person's trajectory through the quantum hologram, but that when they studied the events independent of a person, they got multiple outcomes. Because an event is always person dependent, right?
Yes.
Somebody decides to get out of bed, put their pants on, and drive across town and go fishing rather than go to work that day, right?
Yes.
So every discrete moment in the quantum hologram is a singularity. It's not a multiplicity. But quantum physics shows that it's going on, the Schrodinger's cat analogy shows it's going on in a multiplicity where that person does decide to go to work that morning, or decides to sleep in bed, stay in bed, or get up and, read the newspaper for 3 hours or whatever, rather than go to work. So I think that the variability is in the quantum hologram, not in the sample of the quantum hologram that a person's life is composed of.
Did you?
Are you ready to type? To tape?
Yeah, I've been taping the whole time.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we started again.
Yeah.
So I was saying that I'm fairly certain that that's the case, because they were clearly viewing the quantum hologram rather than elevating our significance in the probes, and we were actually tasked, and that was the third purpose of involving children, is we were told that we were tabula rasa, we were blank slates, and that is to say that in the holograms generated by the chronovisors, children would see things that adults would tend to miss, because adults have biased perception resulting from their experiences. So I remember them using the phrase tabula rasa and explaining that it was a Latin phrase that meant blank slate, blank table.
Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, and so that was part of it. And we actually received specialized training. I mean, I sat in that learning lab and did hours and hours of analysis of these IQ-like problems with, the complete the pattern type, pattern recognition IQ testing.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very esoteric images ultimately, where you couldn't tell whether the right answer was the scrambled eggs with the green center or not, So we were clearly participant observers in the intelligence gathering, the remote sensing in time, if you will, that for which Project Pegasus was principally organized. And then fourth, we were told that we were basically trainees. That is to say, we were time-space cadets. It was expected that when we grew up, we would be in a fully fledged time-space program under DARPA that would rival the space program under NASA. And that is verified, whatever, it's corroborated by the discussion that I was privy to between my father and Donald Rumsfeld that night in Albuquerque at the bar, where he said we plan to send the kids through the Naval Academy as a pretext for involving them in later project activities. Okay, so we were trainees, and we were told that if we qualified in the future, we would be one of the chrononauts in the time-space program. Now, that's what we were told when I was being trained on the project, or just that I just gleaned from interacting with the adult team leaders on the project. But when I spoke with my father in the late 80s about my project experiences and his, he said, no, they may have told you all that, and all that was true. But the principal reason we were using children is we were finding that when we were training adults to time travel, for example, Navy enlisted men, again, sometimes they were going insane when they would come back to the present. He said, we learned that it's not as easy to go from this location in time-space to another and come back with the ease, for example, that we know human beings can scuba dive. Most people who are not afraid of drowning or of water can be trained to put on scuba gear and go 20 or 40 feet underwater and then enjoy the terrestrial environment, explore it, and then come back out and in the aquatic environment, then come back out and reestablish the primacy of the terrestrial environment. That movement between fundamentally different environments is something that humans seem maybe even naturally endowed with the ability to do, because we were diving in for seafood in the lagoons that we were evolving in and so forth. But moving people between time-space coordinates, between times, rather than just physical environments, is something that in many adult time travelers was having such a deracinating effect psychologically that the program found that many of the adults who were trained to time travel later lost their minds. They went into catatonic or fugue states they couldn't extricate the people from, or they committed suicide after panicking when they were back in the present or whatever. Something about the notion that time is relative. And I remember some of these feelings myself when I was time traveling as a child in the project. The awareness that time is relative and that you're like in this ocean of probability caused thinking sometimes it was almost like a fear that the physical universe would drop out from underneath you. There was something fundamentally psychologically destabilizing by going, let's say, from 1971 to 1863 to give the Abraham to see Abraham give the Lincoln, to see Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, as I did, from a time lab in East Hanover, New Jersey, in the spring of 1972. So my dad explained how they were working with children so that as we developed in the project, we would be familiar with time traveling. And he used the analogy of how I had been initially averse to water and didn't like to swim. But after I was introduced to swimming when I was 4 and 5, I became like a human fish. I mean, I would even enjoy putting on just a snorkel and a mask and just go down and swim around in our pool in California for like minutes, or go swimming in the ocean like that. I became like a human fish after originally not enjoying the water. So he said, we knew if we worked with children like you that we would have adult time travelers who could easily move between different times, between our time and other times, and not lose it. So that, in fact, apparently was the primary reason that we were being used. We were trainees because they hoped to acclimate us to time travel in a way in which we could psychologically integrate it so that we would be effective and capable chrononauts when we developed into chrononauts as adults, as young adults in the project. So those are the 4 reasons I remember being told, or either in the learning lab situation or when we were practically interacting with the team leaders. But then that's a 5th sort of overarching reason that my father shared with me in the period in the late 80s when we were talking about what we did on the project.
So when you were sent back to Lincoln time, for example, were you having to dress a certain way as well?
Actually, yeah,
in that time period?
That's a good question. Actually, I did. When we were doing the chronovisor probes to the Lincoln assassination site in New Mexico, one of those summers, it was the first part of the first summer of 1971 for me. Because the second summer was the second half of that first summer of 71 was pretty much dedicated to just. I was going up to the Sandia campus with my dad, and we were looking at images of me doing stuff in the future because they had canceled the time travel to the past. And meanwhile, they had determined that I was destined to be the whistleblower in the project. So we spent the second half of that summer doing something unexpected that my father had been kind of ordered to do, which is take me through scenes of my own future and ask me questions about what was happening. So when I was sent 5 or 6 times, I think it was, to the Lincoln speech site, I was dressed in kind of this evening finery that a child from the privileged class in Washington, the kind of that Tad Lincoln would have been dressed in. You may have seen photographs of Abraham Lincoln's youngest son, Tad, where he has kind of like this elegant jacket on. He has like pants, but then he has like this elegant waistcoat that's almost like a bullfighter's cape, sort of. It's like this fancy jacket. We don't really have anything like it in our time. But it was kind of a little Lord Fauntleroy kind of fancy evening wear that a child from the privileged classes in Washington would have worn during that time. And so that was for those repeated jumps. And I remember always getting muddy shoes because the dirt outside of the sidewalk there was always muddy. There were horses going by and stuff.